Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And as usual, I am your host, Giovanna. I'm so happy that you've joined us. I feel like I start the show off the exact same way every time, but it's just because every time I'm so happy that you've decided to come and listen. But yeah, I think it's officially summertime. It's officially summertime. The 4th of July has already happened. I was hoping that people would stop setting off fireworks each night, since the 4th of July is now over, because my poor dog, he hates the fireworks. Last night they were setting off fireworks and he ran into my room and he's like, I need cuddles. And it was very sweet, but I thought the fireworks would be done. Don't get me wrong, I love fireworks, but, our poor dogs out here. So anyway, today we're actually going to be talking about some really interesting things. I had to do a lot of research for this one, but because there is so much out there. But what we're going to be talking about is emotional intelligence, and also how to improve your emotional intelligence. And we're also going to be talking about empathy and empaths, and if empaths are a thing scientifically. And also we're going to be talking about how to set boundaries in a relationship. If you are someone who has a lot of emotional intelligence, who may be very empathetic or altruistic, it is important to have boundaries. Also, if you're not any of those things, it's also very important to have boundaries in a relationship. So anyway, getting right into emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is becoming a hot topic nowadays, especially in workplaces. So having a very high IQ, now we all know about that. That's your intelligent quotient. And then there's your EQ, which is your emotional quotient. Now, those two things are very important and they go hand in hand. Now, you might know someone who has a very high IQ. Think about, I don't watch Big Bang Theory, but I'm sure people are like, oh, the guy. But the main guy in Big Bang Theory, now he is a perfect example of someone who has a high IQ, but a low EQ. So he has trouble picking up on the emotion, reading the room emotionally, and picking up on other people's emotions. And now in the workplace, I actually had a job where they tested my emotional quotient, or my emotional intelligence. And that is very important now in workplaces, especially now that, we're working with other people and brainstorming is held at a very high standard. And it is important to have a high IQ along with other stuff. Now, just because you have a high high EQ. Just because you have a high IQ doesn't mean you necessarily have a low EQ. It's just very important for those two things to go hand in hand. And also, if you have a low EQ and a low IQ with a high EQ, emotional intelligence, you're just smart in different ways. And I think it's very important to talk about the different types of intelligence. Because a lot of people who may have struggled in school might not feel as accomplished as their peers, or had a tough time performing in school, or may have some sort of learning disability, but have an extremely high emotional intelligence. Now, they just have intelligence in a different sector, and that doesn't mean they're dumb. We just, as a culture and as a society, we hold intelligence, like book smarts, up to a higher standard. But I'm sure you have met someone who has a very low emotional intelligence, and it is hard to create a relationship with them, whether that is a romantic relationship or just a non-sexual relationship, or just as friends. It's tough, but if you are someone who has a low EQ, or might not be as in touch with your emotions or other people's emotions, that doesn't mean that you can't change it. So basically, the definition of emotional intelligence is the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. Now, you could see why that would be very helpful in the workplace, and you can also see why that would be very helpful in a romantic relationship, or, a non-romantic relationship. But your emotional intelligence is defined with 4 attributes. The first is self-management. The second is self-awareness. The third is social awareness, and the fourth is relationship management. Now, these things are also going to be the main things to build your EQ. So when you want to build up your emotional intelligence, those 4 things are going to be the things that you are going to want to focus on. And we are going to be breaking down all of those attributes later on, and talking about what they are, and also how to make it so you can build up those attributes and build up your emotional intelligence, so you can have better relationships and better experience in your workplace as well. So kind of like what I said before, having a high IQ is on its own is not enough for you to be successful, unfortunately. And also, having an IQ, there has been some studies where the IQ tests are not as important. They seem to not highlight all of the forms of intelligence. Like I said before, there are many different types of intelligence, and the IQ test seems to only test for certain parts of intelligence. So, like, for example, if someone has a low IQ, they might also have an extremely high EQ, or other types of intelligence as well. Boy, that's a tough word for me. But yeah, emotional intelligence and IQ are going to go hand in hand for you to have a very successful relationship, very successful career, and that sort of thing. Emotional intelligence is going to affect your performance at work or school, your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, and your social intelligence. Now, to break some of that down, so your performance at work or school. So, it's great if you just have book smarts, but you also need to know how to communicate with your peers. You need to be able to, especially, so at work, let's say you're in sales. It's so important to have both a high IQ and a high EQ. So, you need to be able to, connect with the customer. If you're in school, you need to be able to connect with your peers. There's a lot of group work in school. You need to be able to connect to your teachers. Understand, I'm going to say read the room a lot. You need to be able to understand the emotional, what's happening emotionally in the room. So you wouldn't just walk in if there's if there's a test going on or something, and you wouldn't kick down the door and say, "Hey everyone, I'm here. Sorry I'm late." You can understand where everyone is at around you and not come in and completely disturb that. Or if you do, you might have a lot of disciplinary problems at school or in work as well. You might get more write-ups and things like that just because you might make a mistake that you don't really think you didn't realize that you were doing, because you might not understand where everyone else is at in the room. So your physical health. Now, this is another thing that we're going to get into a little bit more in the next segment. But being able to manage your stress is all a part of your emotional intelligence. If you can't handle your stress, that's going to lead to a lot of physical maladies. For example, heart disease is a big one, strokes, it's just, if you know how to handle your stress, you're going to have a better physical health overall. Your mental health. Again, if you can't handle your stress, it's going to be more likely that you have anxiety or depression. You might not be able to sleep as well as other people, and sleep has a direct correlation with how you manage your mental health and all of that. Your relationships. If you can't understand your partner, where they're coming from emotionally, it's going to be harder for you to connect with them. And if you can't connect with your own emotions, it's going to feel like you are cutting yourself off from your partner so that they can't connect with you. Also, your social intelligence. Now, this is just kind of overall what we've been talking about, but to have emotional intelligence, you also need to have social intelligence. So, to be able to have friends and keep those friends all has to do with social intelligence. So it is something that is very important, and if you feel like you might have a low emotional quotient, that doesn't mean you can't raise that. If you have listened to some of my other episodes that have come out within the past few weeks, you know that I'm all about bettering yourself and improving your life, because by just changing small things. Now, changing your emotional intelligence and your EQ is just the same thing. You can work on creating boundaries. You can work on figuring out your own emotions and observing your own emotions. And all of that is extremely important if you want to raise your emotional quotient. So how do you raise your EQ? You may be wondering. Well, there are 4 key skills to focus on if you'd like to raise up your EQ. Before we break for a commercial, I am going to go over the first of the 4 key skills, and that one is self-management. So self-management is all about knowing how to manage your stress, and knowing how to manage your stress is going to help you think rationally. Now, think about it. If you are able to slow yourself down in the moment and you know how to handle your stress in a way that works best for you, you're going to be able to think rationally and accurately assess other people's emotion. Stress is going to take us, if we're stressed out. Now, let's say somebody tells you something that you might not like. They give you negative feedback or something. Now, if you're able to manage your stress in that moment, you might be able to look past the negative comments that they may have made or the negative feedback that they have given you and see what you can analyze instead of immediately becoming defensive. Analyze what can be taken from their statement, and also what is something that is coming externally. So it might be something that the person who is giving you negative feedback, it might be coming from their end. They may see you working on your emotional intelligence, and that may strike a chord within them. They might see the progress that you're making, and they might be jealous or anything like that. So it might not be coming at you. It might be coming from something that's within them. But if you immediately become self-conscious, if you become stressed out, if you get defensive, that's going to be hard to see that from a rational point of view. Now, stress physically is going to raise our blood pressure. It's going to put us in a fight or flight mode. Our whole nervous system is going to be going into alert when we're stressed out. And that's what, this is all about. If you have an anxiety disorder, you already know all about this. Now, It's going to stop your digestive system. It's going to make your heart beat faster, because your body is getting you ready to run away or to fight. And that goes all the way back, to when we were living in caves and everything, and Neanderthals. Stress used to be something that we would use to literally save our lives. So like if you see a bear in front of you and you're, a caveman or a cavewoman, and, your blood pressure is going to raise, all other physical, bodily stuff is going to stop. That's not important at that time. So your digestive system is not important when you're running away from a bear. So your digestive system is going to slow down, but your heart and blood pressure is going to raise. Your pupils are going to dilate, and your body is preparing you to escape or fight this situation in the best way that will get you out alive. Now, we're not running away from bears and fighting for our lives every day as we once were when we were developing as humans. But our body still reacts to stress in the same way. So if your body is reacting to a negative comment or something that's going on in your life around you, it's going to be extremely distracting for you to rationally understand the emotions that's going on around you and understand your own emotions, because the only thing that your brain is thinking of is either running away or fighting whatever is disrupting your homeostasis, and homeostasis is just making everything the same and making everything level. So if you're not in a calm, normal, relaxed state, your body's going to figure out how to get you back into that relaxed state. And you can't really examine your own emotions when you're like that. So learning how to manage your stress and knowing that this isn't a giant bear that's in front of you and being able to calm yourself down, you can analyze your own emotions. Why did you react that way? Or you can analyze the other person's emotions. Why did they react that way? Why are they saying these things? And that way you are going to understand your emotions, and you're going to understand the emotions of the people around you. So that is going to be the first key to understanding how your emotional intelligence and how to how to make your emotional intelligence better. But there are 3 more key skills that we're going to go over. But first we are going to take a quick pause for a sponsor break. So I hope you join me right after the break.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back. So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the last 3 key skills. In the last segment, we only went over the first key skill to improving your emotional intelligence. So the second one is going to be self-awareness. So this is really important to understand your emotions and why and how you experience the emotions that you do experience. This made me so excited because while I was researching this, they actually brought up your attachment style. Now, if you had listened to, or if you'd like to go back and listen to my Single Life podcast, I talked a lot about attachment style. So attachment style comes again, and so we can talk about it. How were you raised as a child? I recently did see a study come out. I'm not sure if it's a good study, but it said something about how if your parents let you cry as a child without comforting you, and as a baby, that's the only way we know how to communicate is by crying. And if your parents or your caregiver or whoever it was raising you as an infant let you cry, you might be more prone to bouts of anger, because you never knew the attachment or the comfort of what happens when you might be upset or you need something. So you've learned that that's the only way to get what you need, and so you might go off your rocker or have a very short temper compared to other people. If you have a healthy attachment style, that means your parents were there for you when you needed them to. They raised you. You always had food and a roof over your head. Now, this sometimes this doesn't have anything to do with the parents. It has to do to the systematic poverty that we have, at least in the U.S. But if you were raised where your parents were always there for you, you might have a very healthy attachment style. If you are someone who maybe had a overbearing attachment style where your parents were too intense, you might not have a lot of self-confidence that you can do anything. And there are all sorts of attachment styles. So if that's something that is you may be interested in, go to my single podcast and check that out. And then there's so much on the web for that you can look into and learn about attachment styles and everything. So how you experience feelings might have a lot to do with how you were raised as a baby, but that doesn't mean you can change it. Here are some things that to ask yourself how you experience your own emotions. Do they flow from one emotion to the other, moment to moment, as they're happening? So do you experience one emotion and then the other emotion, and you're aware of this? Are they accompanied by physical sensations? So sometimes this could be, it's in your body, like you might, if you're feeling anxious, you could be shaking your leg, or, in your facial expressions, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And, do you have trouble hiding your emotions on your face? Do you experience intense feelings that others notice? Do you pay attention to your emotions when you are decision making? So this could be when, you might want to sleep off because you sleep on it, on a decision, or do you just make a decision off the cuff, because you don't really realize that this might be fueled by emotion or something like that. So yeah, but if any of these experiences aren't familiar with you, you might be closing off your emotions. You might not be experiencing your emotions on a full spectrum. And even if you are feeling most of them, but maybe one or two you haven't really experienced, that's just, you might have closed off that section. And if you are closing off your emotions, the people that you love the most are really going to witness that, especially your romantic partner, your friends, your family, things like that. They're going to notice that you are closing yourself off, and maybe that's to protect you, or maybe that's as you may have been hurt in the past, and so you do that to protect yourself. But to raise your emotional intelligence, you need to reconnect, accept, and be comfortable with all of your emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this can be done with Mindfulness. I love mindfulness. I don't think I've ever talked about this before, but mindfulness has roots in Buddhism, from meditating and things like that. Meditating is a great way to practice mindfulness. And then, I'm going to be talking about this, a little bit more in the next segment. But just being aware of being mindful and present of other people around you in that moment. Mindfulness is also involved in other religions as well, not just Buddhism. There's all sorts of prayer, but you can practice mindfulness for yourself and understand your own emotions, and that's going to be self-awareness, which is the second key skill. We are going to move on to the third key skill, which is social awareness. Social awareness enables you to recognize and interpret the mainly nonverbal cues from others. So people, we are taught and we have learned since we popped out of the womb to use micro expressions and to use nonverbal cues in our face. And the interesting thing is, most of they've done studies on this where people from cultures who have never had any contact with any sort of Western culture at all, or any other culture really, they've like gone into the Amazon and found basically untouched cultures, and they who have never had any experience of other cultures except from the people that are in their own tribe, are in their own unit, and they showed pictures of people who are sad, who are angry, who are excited, and they were able to notice and name those feelings. So even people who have had no contact with the outside world as we know it are able to acknowledge micro expressions and facial expressions. So when you have social awareness, you're able to look at the person you're talking to or look at the group of people you might be talking to and understand what they're feeling and take their social cues and their facial expressions and understand where they're coming from. And you can't do this when you're in your own head. And this, we're going to bring it all right back to mindfulness. So when you're thinking in your own head about your own, maybe what somebody else is thinking of you, or maybe of something that you have to do that day, you are not completely in the moment with the person you are talking to. And you're going to miss these very important social cues that they're giving you. And some of us are very proud of our multitasking skills, but we really can't multitask and also pay attention to the person we're talking to, because if we're doing multiple things at once, we're going to miss on just the tiniest little split second facial expression that the person that we're speaking with might give us. So being in the moment this is very important too with your relationship. Take a time out of your day when both you and your partner can do this. No phones, no distractions, just talking with your partner about your day. Even if it's at dinner time, you can just eat and, have a beverage of your choice and talk with your partner and really be with them in the moment. I think I've said in previous podcasts, I did go to acting school, and I took a Meisner acting technique class. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, Meisner is a form of acting. It is a style that many people use. It is part of, quote unquote, the method. I could talk on a whole other podcast about acting and the methods of acting, but this is not the time nor the place. But what Meisner focuses on is using your character to react realistically in the moment. And there are a lot of Meisner practices that focus heavily on mindfulness and being in the moment. I have feelings about Meisner. Most of them are positive. But the main I'm very happy that I took a Meisner class because it really, really, really helped me be in the moment when I'm not even acting. It's great to use on stage, and I think everyone should, if you are an actor, you should, react realistically to your partner when you're acting on stage. But some of the exercises that we did was repetition exercises. And how that works in Meisner is you'll look at someone and you just say the first thing that pops into your head. Like, you have green eyes. And then they'll say, I have green eyes. You have green eyes. I have green eyes. And you repeat that back and forth to each other until the point of focus changes. And now this could be from you or from the partner or from your partner. They might say, oh, you have a scarf on. I have a scarf on. You have a scarf on. You have a big nose. I have a big nose. Now, at first, this is going to be very uncomfortable because we're not used to being examined that closely, and we're not used to having attention put so much on each other and being in the moment. And learning how to do that in that class was very important for me. Because I realized that I wasn't used to being in the moment and to analyzing the person I was talking to and analyzing this experience that I was in. And it's really important to be in the moment with someone and really analyze their facial expressions. Because later on in the Meisner exercises, you work up to analyzing their emotions. You're upset. I'm upset. You're upset. I'm upset. And you do that repetition. Now, the thing with Meisner is that it always has to be true. So if the statement that you made isn't true, for example, you're upset, you can answer with, I'm not upset, if that statement isn't true. With taking it all back to social awareness, being aware of your partner, really noticing their emotions, and asking them if it's true, because we shouldn't assume. I am going to get into that in the last segment, but you shouldn't assume what your partner is feeling, because it might not be true. So that's why I think Meisner acting technique is very important, not only for actors, but for anyone. And if that's something that you'd like to do, I would highly recommend taking a Meisner technique introduction class, because it's really going to teach you how to be in the moment and how to be present. And it's a really interesting way to learn about yourself in that respect. So I am going to move on to relationship management. This is going to be the fourth and last key skill. And relationship management is going to be working well with others. And that begins with emotional awareness and your ability to recognize and understand what other people are experiencing. So this is all about empathy, which is actually what I'm going to be talking about in the next segment. But you should be aware of other people's nonverbal communication and what they're doing. And we are constantly making micro expressions, and maybe expressions that aren't as micro. I find that I have a really hard time hiding my emotions. And the funny thing with this quarantine is I work in retail, and when I have to wear a mask, it's really nice not having to overly compensate when a customer is telling me a story that might not be as enticing for me. So it's really nice hiding my expressions behind a mask. So it looks like I'm paying attention, but really I'm not. It's easier on me, I guess. But we as humans were designed to pick up on our expressions from other people. And there's all sorts of stuff out there that you can read for body language and things like that. We're always giving off so much information just on our expressions and just on our body language. In college, I was a minor in communication. And I had a communication teacher that was amazing. And she was my 101 communications teacher. And she literally was a professional in understanding people's micro expressions. So you can get a certificate in this, and you can take like classes, and you can like log hours for this, and you can be like a micro expression reader. And this is actually if you're someone who's really good at this, this can actually be used in as a job. You can get this certification and study body language and study micro expressions and facial expressions, and you can be used this can help in the courts to figure out if someone's lying. This could be used in therapy and all sorts of things. Like, I remember one time I got an email that said my card had been charged $300, and she picked me out in a lecture hall and said, "Hey, are you okay? Because you just had a really sudden change with your body language." Like, and I was like, I actually just got a really weird email, so she was just like the coolest person, and she was able to pay. I loved going over and seeing her during her office hours because she was just the coolest. But it's all about being able to understand, people's nonverbals and, being aware of the type of nonverbal communication that your partner is offering is really going to raise your emotional intelligence. And that's going to help with your relationship management as well. And here are some quick ways for you to do that. So by using humor, we're able to relieve stress and also with play. So having a sense of humor is really important when doing relationship management and having emotional intelligence. Laughter actually brings your nervous system into balance, and it helps bring your stress levels down. Learning also when you learn to see conflict as an opportunity to get closer with others. And this is really interesting. So, people are always going to disagree. It's very unlikely that you are going to have a relationship where you just agree on everything and you never argue and nothing. Like, there's no such thing as that relationship. And when you are in a romantic relationship especially, it's very important to figure out how to argue and figure out how to fight. Because if you're going to be with this person for a long time, you're going to argue and you're going to fight. And that's what happens. There is no perfect relationship that exists where you never fight. So if arguing and disagreeing and fighting, it isn't a bad thing. So resolving conflict in a healthy, constructive way is actually going to build trust between you and your partner. And then when conflict isn't perceived as threatening or punishing, it can foster freedom, creativity, and safety in relationships. That is going to be relationships with you and your partner. It's going to be relationships with you and your friends. It's going to be relationships with you and your coworkers. There's always going to be disagreements, and learning how to use humor, learning how to argue, learning to see disagreements as a opportunity for growth is going to be a great way to relationship manage and raise your emotional intelligence. So try to change how you view arguments and how you view disagreements. Now, this is going to be a challenge for you to overcome, and together on the other side, you and your partner are going to be better off for it. Okay, so that is going to complete the 4 key skills in this segment. We are going to take a quick pause for a commercial break, but after that, we're going to be talking about empathy and scientifically, are empaths a real thing? Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back. I have a feeling that this segment might anger some people, because I know some people feel very strongly about this. So just stick with me though, because I feel like I try to do some research on all sides of the spectrum. So when you raise your emotional intelligence, it is very likely that your empathy and your altruism is also going to raise. Now, this brings up the question, do empaths exist? Now, an empath is someone who is highly sensitive to people's feelings around them. And they're also going to be, absorbing the feelings of others, and because of that, they may be very drained after being with many people, taking care of many people. Now, these people are most likely going to be people pleasers. I have no problems with labeling yourself as an empath, but empaths and the idea of being an empath can fall very quickly into the pseudoscience realm. There are people who believe that there are magnetic fields that will lead you to become an empath, and all this other things. And with that, magnetic fields, there's a lot of debunking there. And I read this blog by a doctor. Her name is Judith Orloff. She's had a couple blogs on Psychology Today, and both of her blogs that she wrote that I found started out with "as a psychiatrist," and she also mentioned her book in it quite a few times, where Surviving as an Empath. She says that she herself is an empath. I'd love to see if I could interview her at some point, just because there are some problems with pseudoscience and empaths and things like that. Now, there has been studies, though, that have confirmed that altruism is a thing, but there has also been studies that prove that empathy exists in humans, but not how. There hasn't been any studies confirming of if the idea of an empath will exist. So you can have a lot of empathy and altruism, but you may not have a magic ability of seeing emotions. And I think that's where I kind of fall off the boat for empaths and believing in empaths and things like that, is a lot of the stuff that I read, it was like this magic ability that you have to understand people's emotions. Now, some people are going to be more of a people pleaser, but, you know, and I've also heard people say that, oh yeah, I've always believed that I was an empath, and then I just stopped worrying about what other people are thinking and just try to take their word for how they may be feeling, and not trying to understand if there's some underlying motive there. Because sometimes there just isn't. If someone tells you that they're okay, you just have to take their word for it sometimes, and not have to understand, like, oh, there's something going on here that I see and that nobody else sees. Because sometimes you just have to take other people's words for it. And I think that's a pretty strong thing to say if you might label yourself as an empath or something like that. Now, I totally understand feeling drained after on taking care of people and talking to people. But I think what that might be is people pleasing. You want everyone to feel good around you, and that's totally understandable. And for me, at least, that is taking care. I want to take care of other people around me, and I often feel very drained afterwards. And I believe that's because of how I was raised. I wanted to raise, I was good if I took care of other people. And I had to go through a lot of therapy for that. And I understand that now. And it's still something that I have to work towards. And that's okay, but I wouldn't call myself an empath, because I believe that I don't have a magic ability to understand people. I feel like I do. Well, I know I do have a high emotional IQ, or EQ, cause, I've done tests for other jobs and things like that, and, it came out okay. But I wouldn't call myself an empath. I know I'm a people pleaser though. And that's something that I would look into if you, are someone who believes that they are an empath. But yeah, I just get worried though, because labeling as an empath will quickly go into pseudoscience in a lot of places. But there are some happy mediums out there where they have done studies. For example, there is a study that a psychologist named Abigail Marsh, she wanted to find the differences in the brains of people who are highly empathetic, and she referred to them as altruists. And now I do like the phrase altruists, but she has also argued that there are 4 different types of altruism, and she was mainly only focusing on one type of altruism, which was in the study, which was care. But she did a study on people who her control group was just normal people. But then, her independent group was a group of people who had donated their kidney to a complete stranger, with no ulterior motive. So they weren't getting paid. They didn't get anything in return. They just donated a kidney to someone. And she just thought that these groups of people were just extremely empathetic and, were definitely not a normal group of people. I would imagine, if you donated a kidney to a family member or to a friend, or maybe if you sold a kidney or something like that. But these people, they had no idea who the person was. They just donated a kidney. And yeah, that is probably an extreme form of altruism. And she wanted to figure out how these people are different from other people. She did notice that these people had a larger oblongata when they did brain scans and MRIs than the control group did. And the oblongata is in the front of the brain, and that's going to control a lot of emotions and how you perceive emotions. Basically what she did is she showed both groups, the group that donated a kidney and then the control group, just the regular people who didn't, videos of people experiencing fear. Now, the independent group, the group that had donated the kidneys, they experienced fear of the other person. It felt like they were also experiencing fear of the people in the video. So they were more likely to feel that fear, like really feel it. 'Cause empathy is like really being able to feel what the other person is feeling, like you were feeling that fear. So that was more likely to occur in the people who had donated the kidney than the people who were in the control group of the people who didn't. And again, those people had a different brain. Their brain was literally built differently than the control group. I mean, that is really interesting. And that's when it comes to, I believe that some people are going to have more empathy than other people. And that's not something that I disagree with. Also, people who are going to have higher empathy, temperamentally, they appear to have more humility than the average person. So altruists or empathetic people recognize that they are not fundamentally different from others, and they view that everyone equally deserves the same empathy as everyone else. And that is more likely to happen in people who have high empathy. And conversely, people who have a larger oblongata in their brain than normal. I totally agree that some people's brains are just wired differently. What I have trouble believing is that there is a magical or otherworldly reason why you have a higher form of empathy, or that you can like read someone's emotions or something like that. You might just be very key. You might have an extremely high EQ and a very larger oblongata, but there hasn't been any scientific studies made as to why exactly this happens. So the study just isn't there. The studies prove that empathy exists, but it just isn't there. So I'm hoping that at some point, maybe there are more studies that explains why why some people are more often, they experience empathy more. But I don't think it's a magical reason or something like that. But yeah, you might just be someone who has a high emotional intelligence, who has a larger oblongata. I read a study once that people who are musicians typically have a higher oblongata, which is or a larger oblongata. So it's just interesting. I mean, it definitely something to look into, you know. And another thing that I read is that often psychopaths and empaths are said that empaths are the opposite of a psychopath. And in this study, they said that both psychopaths and altruists have abnormal brains, but in opposite directions. So a psychopath would see the video of a person experiencing fear and not even register that they're experiencing fear. Whereas the altruists, or the group that they donated the kidney, they experienced that fear as if it were their own. So both of those things happening is abnormal. You should be able to recognize that someone is experiencing fear, unlike a psychopath, but you're also supposed to be able to separate yourself from that fear, unlike the altruist or the empath. So both of those people do have abnormal brain functioning. Now that I say abnormal, but that is in psychology, that is the term to use. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Our brains are just wired differently. Same thing with people who are autistic. People who are autistic, they are going to experience the world differently, and it is different from. It's very tough to talk about abnormal and normal. Now, what even is normal? It is the majority of people are going to experience the world this way. Now, if you have an abnormal brain functioning, that doesn't mean your view of the world is any worse or less than the normal brain. It just means that you walk in the world differently than other people do. And especially on the autism spectrum, people hold that very highly, and that is a part of themselves, and that's totally fine. For everyone who I really don't want this show to sound ableist at all. And I really hope that people do understand it. It's just hard for me to talk about it sometimes because I'm not someone who is on the autism spectrum. I have a healthy body for the most part. You know, I have been in counseling and things like that, but other than that, you know, it is your brain and it's your life, and we're all wired differently. And that's okay. You know, but I hope that if you are someone who is a psychopath, or it sounds very bad, but you can actually get help for that. If you're someone who can't understand the fear of others and can't understand, because of media, we associate psychopathology and sociopathology to murderers and serial killers and things like that. And there is a higher chance, if you are a serial killer or a murderer or something like that, that you have a psychopathological problem going on. But it doesn't mean you can't seek out help. It doesn't mean that you can't seek out medication for that. It's just our brains are wired differently. And it's because we're all different and we all have different brain functioning and all sorts of that, stuff like that. So I did want to talk about empaths. So let's say you are someone who experiences a higher amount of empathy. You are someone who may call themselves an empath. You are someone who may call themselves an altruist. Maybe you're someone who's donated a kidney to a stranger with no goal or no ultimatum or anything like that. You may feel extremely drained afterwards, and it's really important that you take care of yourself if you're one of these people. I've done it where I just felt like I wanted someone to take care of me. And I go out and, I try to, when I feel like that, I talk to my friends. And I try not to take care of other people. It's very important to have those boundaries, which is something that we're going to talk about in the last segment. So I don't want to get too into it and take all of my content away from myself. But it is very important to reach out to friends who you know love you and care about you and don't need anything from you. Because based on the thing that I said before about how a very empathetic person will view that everyone is equally deserving of their time and their care. this can lead to people being very drained and feel like everyone needs something from them. But really it's coming from yourself because you feel like other people need your help and need your care. And someone will see that, maybe a narcissist will see that and take. And it's going to be very draining on you. And that's why it's so important to have boundaries. It's so important to have friends, family, partners, whoever, who are going to be there for you, who don't need that from you. And so you can focus on yourself. You can focus on your self-care. Please check out my self-care podcast if you need more tips on how to do that. But before we get into the last segment, which is going to be talking about how to set boundaries in a safe way for yourself and for your partner. Especially, I'm mostly going to be focusing on how to set boundaries in relationships. So we are going to get into that. I do want to break for a commercial, but we'll be right back right after the break.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, you beautiful people, and welcome back. In the last segment, we're going to be talking about boundaries. Boundaries are so important. I really hope that these help you because it is very important to set boundaries in any type of relationship. It's especially important to set boundaries within a romantic relationship, especially if you've had some rocky relationships in the past. So the first one is going to be say no. I was in a relationship where I was yes, man. Like I said before, I'm a big people pleaser. And towards the end, I started to say no. And he started getting really angry. And I just didn't have it, So I discovered that when I started saying no, you really see the other side of people. And it's really important to not say yes to everything. If you don't want to do something, you don't have to do it, and you can just say no. And it gives you so much power and so much confidence to really do that. And that was really important for me to leave that relationship. It was to say no. The next thing is to ask for help, but also to accept help. Now, when you're setting boundaries, it's important to learn about yourself. And there are a lot of people who have grown up believing that they don't need help and that they can do it all on their own. But by building trust and boundaries is accepting help from your partner in a way that is healthy. So if your partner is trying to help you and get you to the next, to level up in your life, I like to, for a lot of people, game theory and using game theory in your life is really important for you to complete your goals. So if you think of it as like a video game, sometimes it's really hard for you to beat the boss or to beat a challenge in a video game without help from the tools around you or from the game, the other players around you. Sometimes you need other people to help you out. So for you to level up and to get to the next, to get all the coins and to get to the next level, sometimes you need a partner to help you get there. So by allowing your partner to help you, it's really going to help you, if you know what I mean. So the next one is going to be delegate tasks. Oh, I am a big one for this. At my job, I think that I have to do everything all the time, and I stress myself out a lot, and I burn myself out. I've done it before where I've just completely burnt myself out because I thought I needed to do everything. It's really important for you to ask for other people, like especially, let's say in the house, to delegate tasks. So let's say if you take turns taking out the garbage each week. So every other week, somebody takes out the garbage. On Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you do the dishes. But then on, let's say Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, your partner does the dishes. And on Sunday, you just let everything build up, or maybe you just use paper plates on Sunday. If you're able to equally delegate the tasks around the house, equally delegate the task in the relationship, if you have kids, any of that, it's going to help you not be burnt out. You're going to avoid a lot of arguments this way. And this way, it's going to create boundaries in the relationship so that one person isn't doing everything all the time. Number 4 is don't overcommit. If you find that you are doing a million things and you're not having time to focus on yourself, it's going to be really hard to create boundaries because I think of boundaries as like a little white picket fence. I'm a very visual person. And if your little white fence just keeps getting closer and closer and closer to the point where you're feeling suffocated, you have overcommitted yourself because you kept moving your fence back a little bit. I use white picket fence because it doesn't have to be a cement brick wall with barbed wire on the top. Like, it's important to be able to let people in and out, but something that's permeable. Maybe like a chicken wire or something that something can go through, but you still have some protection for yourself. So don't overcommit yourself. That goes back to saying no. It's okay to say no. You feel like a big jerk the first time you say no, but if you practice saying no, and this could also be something that you can ask for help from your partner, is saying like, hey, like, can you ask me something where you don't expect me to say yes so I can practice saying no? And this way you can use that in your day-to-day life as well, with your coworkers, with your friends, anything. So in that sense, you can ask your partner for help and, see if you can let them help you build boundaries. Number 5 is ask for space. If you are someone who is very empathetic, it's really, sometimes you just need to be alone. You just need to be away from other people and you need to enjoy your space. This is something that I talked about a little bit in my, self-love podcast. It's really, it's very important for you to experience alone time with yourself. Take yourself on a date, meditate, do something that you're not surrounded by other people, because if you're an extrovert, if you're an introvert, if you're an empath, being with other people can be draining sometimes, and it's okay to step away and recharge so you can come back your best self. And that's all about creating boundaries, to be the best person that you can be, for yourself and also for others. If you're completely drained all the time, you're not going to be of help for anyone, including yourself. It's like trying to draw blood from a rock. You can't do it. So number 6 is going to be communicate. In relationships, the number one thing is communicate your feelings. You need to communicate your boundaries and verbally list them, or even like write them down on a list. Like, these are my boundaries. And some examples of boundaries could be, or not limited to, in a romantic relationship at least, is like, I am comfortable kissing and holding hands, but I don't want to do it in public. I'm comfortable with you texting me, but I might not check in every time you text me. If I'm at work, or if you're doing something, or if you're in school, you're trying to study, maybe you can check in like every few hours. You're comfortable having kissing, but you might not be comfortable having sex right now, and that's okay. So those are some examples of boundaries that you should list out and communicate verbally what you need, because your partner isn't a mind reader, unfortunately. And that goes for you as well. So the next one is going to be never assume what your partner might be feeling. So you can ask them to clarify their feelings, ask them to talk about what's going on, but never assume what your partner may be feeling. So I think of this meme where it's a a man and a woman laying next to each other, and the woman is like looking over his shoulder, and it's like, I wonder what he's thinking, like, or I bet he's mad, or I bet he's thinking about something else. And then it shows the man's like thinking bubble, and he's like, man, I wonder like when my Amazon shipment is going to get here. So, they might just be thinking about something else, but it's important to never assume what your partner is thinking of, because that's probably going to lead to a lot of arguments and things like that. So the next one is know when to move on. This is so important, because if you're with someone who is constantly breaking your boundaries, who isn't respecting your boundaries, it's time to step away from that relationship. That was me when I started telling the person I was with no, and they kept trying to push and push and push and push and push until I just exploded. And that's when you just, if they can't respect those boundaries, you have to step away. And, for healthy reasons, it's just best to shut that person off. If you block them, if you, remove their phone number, all that stuff. But it's, if they're not going to respect your boundaries, they're not going to respect you. And therefore it is time to move on. Say boy, bye, or whatever gender you are with. So stay simple. It is much easier to understand and to respect boundaries if they are not meandering, if they're not, if you assume that they are encompassing of other things. So keep them simple, so your partner knows what you're talking about. Sometimes you have to explain your boundaries like you're explaining them to a child. And that might make your partner feel a little bit, lower, I guess, but it's important to explain them clearly and simply so there is no confusion of what your boundaries are. And the last thing is, say why a boundary is important. I need you to do this because of this. So this could be an example of when you constantly text me, and maybe it's like if your partner's always texting you, asking you where you are. So you could say, when you blow up my phone, it makes me feel like you don't trust me. And I don't like that. So can we have a boundary where you text me and I will get back to you within the hour? But you can't text me a million or call me a million times or whatever. So by creating that boundary and saying why it's important and making that simple and making it known and communicate, if you put all of these things together, you're going to have healthy boundaries. And if the person in your life still can't follow those boundaries, that's when it's to step away. With a relationship, if it's a romantic relationship, really just step away and cut all ties. But if it's something that, if it's a family member, it might be a little bit more difficult. So limit your time with them and limit the amount of communication that you have with them, just so you can continue to work on your boundaries, so you can continue to work on your empathy and your emotional intelligence. It's all about making yourself better, happier, so you can be better and happier for the people around you. And that is going to lead to more success. It's going to lead to you just being a overall happier person. And who doesn't want to be happier? So guys, that is going to conclude the podcast. I'm so happy you've joined us. I really hope that you like this one. There's so much information out there on emotional intelligence. There are quizzes and tests that you can take on emotional intelligence. There's so many articles about empaths and empathy. I would be careful going into empaths and going in with a clinical or critical mind, if that is something that you are into, just because it can it can go off the rails kind of quickly, I've found. But just be careful out there while searching the webs. You guys are all smart web users and internet users, so I know you can do it. But there's so much information out there if you want to learn more about attachment skills, if you want to learn about Meisner acting technique, if you want to learn about meditation. There's so many things out there for you to learn about and to get better at, so you can become a happier person and yeah, that's all we want. We just want our relationships to be good. We want, us to be good and all that fun stuff. So guys, please subscribe, and rate and review the podcast. I would love to read some reviews at this point. It would be pretty cool. If you can like us on all the social medias platforms, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. Just search GSMC Relationship Podcast and we'll come up. But yeah, and you can interact with me, for those as well. Also, if you'd like to interact with me personally, I've never really done this before and I don't know if it's against the, GSMC rules, but you can contact me on my personal platforms. My name's Giovanna Accordino. You can go to my website at giovannaccordino.com. That's mostly for my acting stuff, but I have some blogs on there, and that's GiovannaAccordino. If you just Google that name, you're going to find all sorts of stuff. You have my Instagram. I have a couple different Instagram pages. I'm not on Twitter. Don't like Twitter, but I'm on TikTok too, so I make fun videos sometimes. But yeah, you can interact with me on those platforms as well. But also please rate and review, like all the stuff for GSMC Relationship, and you can also interact with me on there. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.